pledge allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, I'll call the meeting to order. We have a quorum, everyone's present. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the agenda?
Yes. I move to approve the agenda.
Do you want to address?
I have a couple changes. I actually have three. Under the consent agenda, we're going to remove the separation agreement that has not been completed yet. Item 8, under fundraisers, we have a third one to add for baseball banners. And under item 13A, we do have a resignation, Macy Andreessen, middle school volleyball. Okay, so with those changes, if you could.
I'll move to approve with the changes.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Chris, seconded by Sarah to approve the agenda with those three changes. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, next is the consent agenda, minutes, invoices, and financial reports. Sarah met with Karen this month.
There was a BE publishing for e-textbook licenses. That's good for 5 years. I thought that was interesting. It's good to know. I was like, what's this rabbit design? That was new lettering for buses. I think I remember like rabbit buses when I was a kid. That makes sense. NASSP, that was the National Honor Society dues. And then there was the payment for the final 2 buses as well. We have all 3 of the buses. That was all I had. Anyone else have any questions?
Karen, any particular highlights you want to point out this month?
No, it's special ed this month because we pretty much paid all the special ed and we go out of those, so expenses considerably.
Thank you. Any other questions, or do we have a motion on the consent agenda?
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Sarah, seconded by Jeff to approve the consent agenda. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, next we have what's going well, middle school, high school.
Hi,
Hi, Andrea.
I have 3 big topics. So first of all, the most important one is you have an invitation to the prom in front of you. It's right around the corner, and Miss Benson did send you an email as well, so if you could get that filled out as soon as possible when you decide if you're going to attend prom, please let her know. Any questions on that? Okay, that's number 1, sticky. The second thing is we're planning a 6th grade visit for the incoming 7th graders coming up in May. And so we're going to be having 53 PAC 6th grade students and 15 Lorenz Marathon 6th grade students for a total of 68 coming over to visit us on May 8th. So they'll get to hear from the different middle school teachers, the counselor, myself, Nurse Ann. Student council is going to do a little spiel to try to drum up some more interest in that. The music department will talk. It's going to be a good little afternoon, not super long time, but it's a good chance for us all to get together. And then we choose 14 8th graders as a middle school team to give tours to the kids. So we break them up into groups and they'll get to tour the building that afternoon. So questions on that at all?
68 seems like a pretty
It's a good
size
class.
Any idea out of Lorenz 6th grade, how many would be coming in 7th grade?
That's 15.
Is that all of them?
As far as I know, yes.
I like that they do that, because I think it's nerve-wracking to transition school, so.
I think it's fun that 8th graders show them around.
Yeah,
These
so
are
they
big
get
kids.
to meet some 8th graders and yeah, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to give a little plug for our, this year and for several years, we've had an EBCE program, which is, and I wrote down what this was, help me out, EBCE, Educational Based Career Exploration, I believe, but it's through Imagine the Possibilities, and it's an opportunity for some of our students who are affected by disabilities to get out into the community and do some work-based learning. Right now, we're serving 5 kids in that area, and next year I could see us maybe serving 6 or 7, depending on what everyone decides as far as 4+ programming that we offer for kids with disabilities. The issue is the EBCE program is going to be discontinued after this year. So I'd really like us to try to do something like this ourselves for them, which I think we can definitely do. I will tell you, and I want to say this publicly, one of the things the EBCE program has been running into this quarter with finding new placements for our students is community, businesses, and et cetera are saying no. They are turning down the opportunity for our kids to come in because it is a little bit of work on their part. It's a commitment. So I just want to throw that out there. We'd love everyone's support to get these kids some opportunities in our community. But it obviously takes those business members, business owners, and whomever being willing to open up their places of work for those kids. And they go with an associate, so we provide a lot of EBCE provides a lot of the background, and it is a cost to our district. So that cost would go away if we were to do it ourselves. There'd be a little bit of a savings there. It still would require the use of our resources, which we're already committed to doing, so.
For those business owners who might be listening and watching, what kind of things would these kids be able to help them with, or have they done historically?
So one of the examples, we've had students go out to the hotel and they help with stacking chairs, wiping tables, folding towels, vacuuming, washing windows, anything that, they can just kind of hands-on do collectively with the support of an adult, so.
What is the obligation for the businesses?
It's not a huge obligation. I mean, right now they go every day for like 2 periods a day. So it's about 80 minutes-ish. We could certainly look at different options, especially if we're doing it ourselves, to kind of adjust depending on what businesses are comfortable with.
So there's some flexibility in there.
There is, yep. We've had kids out at True Value. We've had kids at the elementary.
Woods grocery store.
Sometimes stocking shelves, dusting, sweeping, any of those kinds of skills that they can learn out there, so.
Could our government partners, any of the cities in the district, or like the conservation, if they have spring cleanup type things and stuff like that, could kids help with some of those things?
Yeah, I mean, those are great ideas, yes. This is more of an everyday commitment
Okay.
that we're kind of asking for, but again, I would be open to if it's 3 days a week, or if the business owners need something less than what we're doing now, we could work with that, I think. Because they just need the opportunities.
Would
It's
there
important.
be, if we were running the program ourselves, would there be an opportunity, so like some of those things were seasonal, if we got a seasonal rotating schedule? Yeah.
Which is sort of what we have now, but
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. So maybe, the conservation lands and some, but then they can do something somewhere else, and we just, as long as we can find enough people to partner to fill in some of those.
So it's a good opportunity for our kids.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, for elementary, we have the special guest this evening, forming an ASL, which you guys will help me with. I know it's sign language, but I don't know what the A stands for.
Is that American?
Good evening, President, Vice President, School Board members, Superintendent, and community members. My name is Amelia Lou Miller. I'm a 6th grader here at Pocahontas Elementary. Both my parents are deaf, and therefore I am a child of deaf adults. I have always wanted to improve communication access in our community, and to do that, it takes a little bit of time to learn the basics of ASL, American Sign Language. I've come here to talk about an ASL club that I would like to start. I believe doing this ASL club will impact our community by helping spread awareness and ability to communicate with the deaf, hard of hearing infants, and nonverbal children in our community. ASL is not only limited to communicating with the deaf and hard of hearing, it is useful with music, plays, and various sports. We have had a sign-up sheet at the elementary available for all ages to sign up for the last 2 weeks, and we have had an amazing turnout of those interested in participating. The plan is to have this ASL club meeting once a week for about 45 minutes located at the elementary right after school. I have Mrs. Carlson's permission to get the club started, and I would like your approval as well.
Really fantastic presentation.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yes.
Anybody have any
I
questions?
have a question. So what age group are you looking for? I mean, can you be in first grade and attend this
Yeah.
club?
I'm looking for any age so we can have a great turnout.
You even have one teacher's night.
You said you've had a great turnout on your sign-up sheet. How many people have signed up?
We've had about 55 total. We have 4 kindergartners, 4 first graders, 5 second graders, 4 third graders, 9 fourth graders, 8 fifth graders, 17 sixth graders, a 7th grader, a 9th grader, and 2 adults.
Wow,
That's impressive.
that's awesome. Yeah. I think that counts as a foreign language too. Colleges like it, yeah.
The younger you learn, the faster, the easier.
Yep. And the foreign language can be offered in the school if the school is accepting of a teacher, and colleges too, that can be a credit that goes to, and offered as a third language.
Anybody else have any
Is there-
questions for this one?
Is there any cost to taking the class, or providing the class?
No, not right now.
Wow.
Is this done after school?
Yeah.
It is?
Yes.
Maybe I missed that.
Yeah, once a week. Weekly.
One concern that, we did have was there's so many people that are wanting to join, but we're a little bit concerned about transportation. And Mrs. Carlson was kind of working with us to figure out what we needed, and we didn't realize that there would be so many people, so. But, we have 55 plus summer parents included in that as well. So our numbers are probably more than 55. Because we asked for the younger group of people, and then the parents wanted to join as well for the younger kids. You know, for responsibility for those kids.
Will this go on in the summer also?
We could offer it in the summer if it was something that was possible.
And the reason I asked was around the transportation question. And if we're doing it during the school year, we have some better flexibility on how to help with transportation.
Right.
So what you're looking for, if I'm understanding that part correctly, would be for this club to have the same support that a sport would. And if kids are in outer parts of the district, that the district would be providing transportation. Is that
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And that's something we can look into further. I mean, I think part of the plan initially was with the expectation that parents would be a part of that providing of transportation in and out. We'd have to see.
We'd have to look into the transportation part of it. Other questions or discussion from the board?
It's fantastic.
It is fantastic.
Wonderful.
Way to go, Melanie. There's a smile.
And we're thinking about starting in about 2 weeks so we can get our numbers together and contact, parents.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you.
I don't think we have any other questions, but I think we might be able to have a discussion and a vote about approving that. Does anybody have any, well, actually first, does anybody have a motion?
I'll move to.
I got Jeff for transportation. I think he wants to chime in.
Please.
That's okay. Hold on, I'm trying to get it. He's watching from home. He's trying to.
That's multi-talented.
Yeah.
I also have my own email if anybody has questions, so I can give that to you guys if you want to email me.
Sure, now if you give it to us now, we are streaming public, so you're about to give it to everybody.
I mean, it is public information, it's all Facebook and stuff, so.
Oh, it is?
Go
Okay.
ahead.
So it's called PokeyASLClub@gmail.com. PokyaSLClub@gmail.com.
Karen?
Yeah, and if you know anyone that wants to join, let us know.
You have to turn your volume down. Sorry for the technical difficulties here.
Get so much feedback, you can't hear anything.
We contacted.
All right, you're on speaker, you're on my speaker, so you should be able to hear us.
Go ahead and bring him up here.
Excuse the picture.
Good evening, Jeff.
Good evening.
You wanted to share something about potential transportation around the ASL club?
Well, I'm gonna give you this. If you do it for one club, you're gonna have to do it for every club.
Understood?
As of right now, we do not transport clubs. And I'm gonna tell you this, if they're only meeting for 45 minutes, our sports shuttles are at 5:30. What's the rest of them kids gonna do at 5:30?
And I was wondering if we could time this with the sports shuttles, which most of those then are after, they're later and take a little bit longer. Okay, and I know historically we haven't done this for clubs. We have expanded clubs this year. Is there any other clubs that have currently expressed issues around transportation from the outer parts of the district?
Not to my knowledge. The only club that uses the sports shuttle is the esports. I think one night a week. They might have a couple that ride, but if we do not run a sports shuttle that night, we do not transport them.
Okay, and with the clubs, do we encourage parents to get together and kind of create some carpool sharing type scenarios if someone's coming from Rolfe or Pomeroy, Lorenz or whatever, to help accommodate? We might be able to get some communication listings out amongst your participants so that they can ride, share, and do some things. You're getting to hear this right up front, so we're not doing that for any other clubs. We're gonna hold back on that probably a little bit tonight, but we'll continue the discussion and vote on approving.
One of the other concerns I got, Tony, is we're talking about hauling elementary age kids. What
Please.
if the parent's not there to pick them up? What do we do?
Understood. And then another further complication, and what you're saying there is normally we obviously have that around the normal school day, but for elementary kids, we don't have anything past that for sports practices or other things like that. And that's also an advantage of having the parents responsible for bringing the kids and taking them home from the younger club sports. Right, Jeff?
That's correct, yeah.
Andrea, were you gonna add something?
Well, Tracy just said transportation was to be the parents only at this point.
Is that,
Just to clarify.
I mean, does that seem reasonable?
Yes.
Do you think it's reasonable too?
Yeah.
Okay.
I like Google Docs to organize, then people can sign up who can take what, sometimes that's awful.
And mostly for information tonight is what she was letting me know.
Yep. No, we appreciate that. And,
Yeah, no, that's
we
great.
appreciate the request too, but now you kind of, we're not doing that for other clubs, so we kind of stay in the same lane that we have there. Other discussion, actually, we got a motion first. Do we have a motion around creation of the ASL club for, elementary and high school students, elementary to high school students?
Or a blessing at least. I mean, because we don't necessarily have organized clubs
Yeah.
below middle school level.
And so what we're really looking for here is board permission to allow the creation of this club and the use of the school space after school to have those meetings. So do we have a motion to that effect?
I'll move to.
I'll second.
Okay.
Can we have a motion, Joe, help me out here, can we do a motion in a second if it's not technically on the agenda? Is it just more of a, it's okay to do?
It is on the agenda, but it's under what's going well, not
Yeah.
under
It's
business.
not
I
under
think
business,
that-
not under
Can we
business.
just get a blessing or just like?
Yeah.
Can we do?
I think you're getting a lot of approval.
I move to bless.
That covers it.
That works perfectly fine.
I started.
You have a blessing and no resistance from the board. Please go take this to the community and those kids and do what you want to do there, Miller.
Yeah.
Keep up the good work.
Yes,
absolutely.
absolutely.
Thank you so much.
It's exciting.
Good job.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks, Cam.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. That was a good idea.
Yep, sorry about that.
No,
Okay.
that's good.
No,
Good. That's what we need.
Next, we have public communication with the board. We did have one person sign up. Hannah?
You guys can pass those on. Pocahontas School Board members, my name is Hannah Copenhaver, and I'm addressing you today as a parent of a child at the elementary school of the Pocahontas Area School District. I will not violate policy by stating names of your employees. As of Friday, March 14th, my child has been home. I asked the superintendent to meet with the board under a closed session under code 21.5.1, section C, to discuss strategy with counsel in matters that are presently in litigation or litigation is imminent, where its disclosure would be likely prejudiced or disadvantaged to the position of the governmental body that is in litigation. The superintendent stated that the school board does not participate in those meetings and would not hold a closed session. So I'm addressing my parental right in education by addressing you publicly today. I am addressing my right as a parent in the public education system. As a parent, I have the right to be informed of every decision regarding my child, particularly regarding Section 504 and ADA law. We had a 504 plan put into place for medical needs when my child was enrolled in the district for the 2024-2025 school year. A 504 plan is an accommodation generally for medical needs that do not interfere with academic learning and curriculum change. A 504 is a living federal document that is signed upon with accommodation monitoring. This can include anything up to a one-on-one aid without extra funding. A 504 is applicable to public schools because the schools receive federal funding through the state, the CAC-FP food program. Public school also falls under Title II of the ADA. In August 2024, the plan was developed and I reviewed the document before signing an agreement to approve. This plan was signed by myself along with multiple other members of the staff. In this meeting, I clarified my rights as a parent, that I would not sign a medical release as my right as a parent. Sorry, I did this in 30 minutes. I provided the required documentation for an IEP, which is just a diagnosis on how to treat the condition. A medical release is not needed for law. On August 23rd, 2024, I received a call from my child's primary care physician that a school nurse was trying to access records and speak to the providers without my written consent. On October 2nd, 2024, my child with a disability was unable to join peers on a school health walk due to the disability, and staff that refused to provide accommodations for my child to participate. I only found out because my child told me. This plan was updated again on October 30th of 2024. Might have been the 31st, but I'm pretty sure it was the 30th. I did not receive a signature page on this or a final draft on this. I did review a final copy. I did not review a final copy or sign this document. I did receive an email copy, did not receive an email copy of this either. At this meeting, I verbally addressed my parental rights again about not signing a medical release. I also shared with the team that school nurses can contact Kelly at the Iowa Department of Education. Kelly is the state nurse for Iowa Department of Education. She can give the school nurses information to contact the Iowa City Hospital to address different medical conditions without personally identifiable information. This information was also sent after the meeting via email. And it's because the Iowa State Department of Education holds a contract with the Iowa City Hospital. So there's that. Starting in February 2025, my child's accommodation monitoring paper showed that the classroom temperatures were above the signed upon 504 plan. I addressed this in an email to the principal on February 26, 2025. The principal believed the 504 was not violated. I clarified my perspective of alleged violations. Due to the principal's absence, I notified the superintendent. The superintendent stated that the 504 was not violated. After a couple days, I received a response Response: after sending follow-up emails, the superintendent claimed the HVAC system was not under control for a couple of weeks. However, I was not notified and other placement was not made within the district. On the same day of the HVAC email, the accommodation sheet was still not according to the plan for classroom temperature. I am letting you know what is going on, as my parental rights have been repeatedly violated. I save every email, I record every meeting. I keep documentation because I know that if it's not in writing and recorded in the education system, it didn't happen in the court system, and I won't have anything to stand on. I will be filing the following complaints: ICRC, which is the Iowa Civil Rights Commission; OCR, Office of Federal Civil Rights; Iowa State Department of Education; BOE, Iowa Education Licensure, and Iowa.
45 minutes.
She's right at the end.
And Iowa State Board of Nursing. Thank you.
You may or may not be aware, but we're not allowed to respond
Oh,
to
I know.
public comment.
I've been through this whole loop before. I'm good.
Thank you for that. Okay, we'll be moving into the business section of our agenda next. First item on the agenda for business is discuss, approve the plan for Pomeroy property after demolition. We were going to have Connor from Ehlers available to participate in this discussion. He is our attorney who specializes in property law. Is Connor on?
Karen, do you have Connor up yet?
Fine, no, I have Travis and I haven't heard anything from
Well, we're connecting with him. I can give everybody an update. This is also in your PR committee file notes on our shared folder. Find the right document here. So the PR committee attended the city council meeting last Monday. And this was to follow up on the two questions that came out of our board meeting in February, which had to do with disposition of the property, whether or not they would have an interest in that. If they did have an interest, whether or not they wanted us to save the playground equipment, and our discussions around insurance. So we went and met with them.
The floor too? Was there something about?
There was a separate discussion about the floor, and that was that add-on discussion where we'd get a quote and Pomeroy would decide if they were going to pay for salvaging pieces of the floor.
Okay, yeah.
So we went and met with Pomeroy citizens, basically thanked them for having us that evening, explained why we were there with Mr. Kramer to share some good news, let them know that we had a couple questions coming from our previous board meeting, and also wanted to follow up on our previous public relations meeting with them the last time. This was a great opportunity to focus on the things that unite us going forward versus the things that had divided us in the past. PAC and Pomeroy have worked very closely together over the last year plus, and we want to continue to build on that. I thanked Mayor Lotes and Mr. Kramer on behalf of the school board for the work they continue to put in behind the scenes to get the best outcome for the kids in all of our PAC communities. They then had a discussion about the property and our questions. We talked about contracting DW Zenzer, what we paid them, and ultimately came to that question of if we chose to give the property to Pomeroy, would they have an interest? We hadn't voted on it. They hadn't voted on it. Somebody had to go first. And so they did hold their vote. It did pass. They would have an interest in the property if we wanted to do so. They also said if going that route that they do want to keep the playground equipment. They had some things to check, to validate, to make sure that they could bring it up to code for the city. And as far as the cutting up of the floor option, they gave us some definitions, and Mr. Kramer's getting a quote with DW Zenzer for cutting out a couple sections in 3x3 squares and also potentially cutting out the letters at one end of the gym. We'll get them some of those numbers and get back to them. We discussed the status on the trophy and memorabilia items and had worked with the city and our insurance company the weekend before to get those things out and into their possession. They now have all the trophies and all the memorabilia from inside of the school. And then last to share with the board is, last year when we met with them, they'd indicated the things that were most important to them about the school as one of the communities in our district. Was mental health support, behavior impacts, and the ease of our website use. We've talked about how that has continued to evolve over the last year, and then got into a discussion about what we're currently doing for our mental health programs. They were very pleased to hear those, the updates from Mr. Kramer, which has been shared then with Mayor Lotes to put in the paper there. They also asked about our mentor program for kids, and if there's a way that the communities could be more involved in those. Quick summary of that meeting with Pomeroy City Council. Has Connor joined us now?
And waiting to get which number to call him at. He hasn't said he's available, so now I just need to get a connection. Excuse me. Yeah, if you want to email it to him, that'd be fine, because I'm connecting with him by email. Otherwise, I've got his number. Okay. Okay, let me get you out of my ear, Connor, and put you on speakerphone. Hold on. All right, are you still there? Can you hear us?
I am.
Perfect. All right. They are ready to discuss the Pomeroy building.
Hey, Connor. Can you hear us okay?
I can. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I'd like to take just a moment at the beginning here, if you could, to kind of share with the board the conversation we had about what the standard process is and sort of what our options are between keeping the property, gifting it to another government entity, an RFP to sell it to the highest bidder. I'll kind of walk through what the options are for the board.
Sure. Yeah. So as I understand it, we're at the doorstep of approving a contract to demolish the building. And then the conversation revolves around what to do with the property itself once the building is removed from the property. The sale of real estate, so first of all, the district could keep the property and find something else to do with it. If we decide to sell it, a public hearing is required before we sell real estate. So there will be an opportunity for the public to comment on whichever avenue the board decides with respect to disposing of the property. There's specific authority for a school district to gift real estate, meaning to transfer it for no consideration, to a city, county, or another government entity that shares jurisdiction over that property. So if it's within the city limits, it could be gifted to the city, it could be gifted to the county in which it sits, or another similar government entity that has ownership and control over that property. If not to a government entity, there's no specific authority to gift the property, and so the property would need to be sold for some value. There's no requirement to obtain an appraisal for the property or to value it in any certain way. There's also not a requirement that the property be marketed in a certain way. So it's really within the board's discretion to determine how you want to market it for sale and how you want to determine the terms of whatever transfer you complete. Many districts opt for an RFP or some form of marketing process just to see what offers might be out there, particularly when you're first spending money to demolish the property. But ultimately, that's just a business decision for the board to make.
Thank you, Connor. So really kind of three choices. We could keep it and maintain it. We could sell it through an RFP process, or we have some legal options to gift it to one of our partner entities. Correct?
My opinion is to gift it.
Can we gift it with,
That's my opinion.
Like we say.
My opinion is to gift it.
can we gift it with, I don't even, like a clause, kind of like, we had wanted to put a bus stop there. Could we gift it with a clause that we be, an easement, there you go, to put, the bus stop there?
Yeah, so somebody I think hit the nail on the head there, that we could gift it with a reserve an easement, allowing us the continued use of that site for a bus stop. Absolutely.
Good catch, good catch.
I like, oh, we still.
No, go ahead. We're still in discussion. I suppose technically I could call for a motion and then we can
Discuss.
have the discussion through that.
I have one question. Has anybody in the public in the county showed any interest in purchasing, just out of curiosity?
Not with the building. We went through a formal
I know with the
RFP
bid-
process, right?
Yeah, But
Right.
just bare properties, anybody's shown any interest at all?
We have not solicited that.
Okay.
Nobody has, nor have we
Well,
solicited it.
I understand we haven't advertised or anything. I just wonder if anybody said, hey, it's.
If you're
very-
not selling it.
No, one of the things as we get into the discussion, and what we looked through for our demolition plan, it was returning it basically to green lot, repairing the drainage, redoing the ground slope, et cetera. If this is then a green lot in the city of Pomeroy, it's gonna be worth roughly less than $1,000 per lot. How many lots would actually sit on that? And so in the end, what we're really talking about is if we put together a bid to sell it to the highest bidder, we're looking at several $1,000s, but probably 10 to 20 max, okay? And we got it from Pomeroy. We could give it back to Pomeroy. When we look at our partnership with the city and what we're trying to do, as well as this is how the rest of the district would look at it too. What does this mean to Lorenz if we choose to give it back to Pomeroy as opposed to trying to get a little bit of money back from them? You know, how will our constituents feel about that? How will Pomeroy feel about us selling a piece of property in the middle of their city? These are some of the discussions that we want to have at the board table as to why we would make the choice that we would.
It's like that board discussion training we had previously, like, these are our legal options, but what's our ethical duty?
Our fiscal duty, as you look at that, if we could sell it, you know, reasonably, maybe between 10 and 20,000 after we've done everything to demolish it. Would $10,000 or $20,000 and selling that to the highest bidder and Pomeroy getting whatever that is in the middle of their town that we sold it to, would that be worth it when we know that
Goodwill.
one student in open rolling out for 13 years is $104,000?
Yeah.
Right, so.
And we made, you know, as a board, we spoke early about transparency. We spoke early about ensuring that we're doing as a whole board what's best for all of the communities within our district, not just serving one. And so, you know, I think the conversation might be different if it was a green lot on the edge of town. It is a green lot in the center, the very center, the very heart of their town. And I don't know that living north of Pocahontas, I know what's best for Pomeroy. I think that's, for me, that's a city decision for them to be able to utilize that to the advantage of their town. Because we know that when any town in our district wins, we all win.
Mhm. It just feels like a goodwill measure to the town and our district, that we're honoring them.
Yeah, it's not a good, it's coming back to that ethical partnership and that this came from you. We've used it for its useful purpose. We're returning it to you.
It's what's right.
I
Really simple.
would like to make a motion.
I'll second.
I'll move to approve to gift the property to Pomeroy with an easement to be used as a bus pickup location.
And one thing I just want to clarify, right now, we are voting on a path, and then we have to have a public hearing. And then we have to have a final vote to formalize that.
Yep.
So right now, what your motion is for us to start down that path and to schedule a public hearing
Okay.
for us to gift this property to Pomeroy, right,
Okay.
Joe?
Correct. We need to verify with Connor. That's my
I
understanding.
was gonna say, is it for a gift or just the 7th?
So, go ahead, Connor.
Yeah, thanks for jumping in there. That's correct. Even with just the, with it just being a gift, you still have to have the public hearing first. So, yeah, this is sort of authorization to start the process, but we'll still need to hold the public hearing before we can formally authorize.
Okay,
So
we
I
have
make a motion to start the plan to gift it to Pomeroy with an easement for a bus stop.
We have a motion from Sarah for Joe to schedule the public hearing to start the process for us to then ultimately have a vote for gifting this property to Pomeroy. That motion has been seconded by Dina. Okay, we did have a lot of discussion beforehand, but before I go to the vote, I'm gonna leave that open. Does anyone else have any discussion? Does anyone like to speak against that proposal?
I think we should just keep in mind that we would like to have this all transpire by July 1st. For insurance.
Correct,
reasons.
correct. We would be asking Pomeroy to take possession by July 1st.
Yeah. So all parties need to keep that in mind.
Any other discussion, or I'll call for the vote?
I got a question. How does an easement work for insurance purposes? Is it covered by the city? Like the section?
So Connor, if we get an easement to put a piece of property, what we're talking about is a shelter for the bus stop, so kids could be protected from the weather, and we're pulling up beside the sidewalk to park the bus in the mornings and drop kids off in the afternoon. Who would pay insurance for that structure and for the piece of property that we're asking for the easement on the property that we're ultimately talking about gifting to the city?
Work together.
You could ask your insurance agent. Some insurers have been reluctant to include in a general liability insurance policy just a bus stop site like that. But I think typically what the sort of injury and damage concerns that you'd have at a bus stop are typically vehicle related, and so that'd be covered by your bus insurance, your motor vehicle insurance. But I would check with your insurance agent on the general liability for that site. I don't know in terms of structure insurance, casualty insurance. That'd be just an economic question with the insurance agent about whether purchasing a policy to insure a bus stop structure would be worth what you'd be paying for the insurance.
Just self-insure for it.
Right, exactly.
Liability.
Okay. All right, so we have a motion by Sarah, seconded by Dina. Start the process to gift the property to the city, reserving an easement for a bus stop. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. At the same time, Joe, we'd ask you to look into insurance around it.
Yep, got it noted.
Thank you, sir. Connor, I believe that's everything we needed you for.
Thanks, Connor.
All right.
Thanks,
Thanks everyone.
Connor.
Good evening.
All right, next is our calendar hearing for the 25-26 school year. And this is an opportunity for public comment on the hearing. Is that right, Joe?
It's okay.
Is there anyone who came to speak on behalf of the calendar here? You want extra weekends, Millie? Now's your chance. All right. So we'll move on then. Next is the Apogee proposal. You have a packet here from Apogee. Couple reminder points on this one in particular. Last year, we met with, I got this. So last year, we met with middle school and high school staff, elementary staff, the administration, the AD and coaches, the music and fine arts booster clubs, the athletic boosters, and the Pocahontas County Economic Development. And we met with all 7 of those stakeholders on our communications plan. And the feedback from all of those groups was that the number 1 recommended choice was Aptitude. Okay? At that time, we decided we wanted to make sure that this process survived the strategic planning process and that having a communications platform would still be part of what we wanted to do. After we voted in the draft plan last month, this kind of resurfaces again. And at the same time, Aptitude came forward making us a discounted offer. We asked Mr. Trimble to be here tonight. He wasn't feeling well, but did send a little information to share with the board. One of the things that he wanted to make sure of was that if we did approve this, that he would have an opportunity to discuss with them the timeline and make sure that the implementation was well planned out and could be well coordinated on our end. He was still wanting to complete a proper communications roadmap for the district. He would need some internal support and support behind who is publishing different things and how that would come forward. This program would replace the district website, the Remind program, the built-in calendar from Bound, the lunch menu, and many other facets associated with our community communication. The contract is time sensitive, although we can certainly approve Phil up to the dollar amount that they're offering and then let him go back and negotiate a time with Aptitude. He also notes that this would come from PEPL funding and wanted us to be aware of that this won't be on the general fund.
The month, or the yearly and the monthly charge? Was there a monthly charge on this, I was thinking?
Annual.
It's annual?
It's
So
annual.
the annual charge would always be on Pebble too?
That's my understanding.
Yes, yeah.
It would be?
Renewal, because a lot of the technology
Because
renewals go
It's
on.
non-educational technology for software.
Nice.
So after talking with him, he was basically recommending not that we vote in and approve and sign the contract tonight, but that we vote in, give approval to him and Joe to go negotiate the time frame that works for proper launch of the district, and for him and Mr. Kramer to have the opportunity to define what we would need internally for this to be a successful launch.
Can my kids get this so they stop asking me what's for lunch every day?
I would hope so. Yes, it's a phone app. It also has a web-based access version. There were a lot of neat features about that one that everyone really liked. The one thing about it to keep in mind is that with Aptitude, we're the content creators. Gives us the platform and the tools, but we have to create all the content, and that comes from staff. Might be able to get that to come from students, but that's not the way things are currently necessarily structured today. And so we need a little time to work on that. Phil also asked me, and I wanted to put this before the board, what kind of timeline would we be looking at? Well, of course, we'd have to talk about it, but this is the sort of thing that ideally we'd have in place by the beginning of next school year. Maybe you could start it in July, have some time to implement some things, but our real goal would be, can we have this live before school?
Does Phil, what did Phil think of that question? Did he answer that question?
When I gave him that time frame, he thought that was great. He just didn't want this to be like, we're launching in April.
Oh,
I'm dumping the website tomorrow, and
I think this is a huge overhaul. I don't think there's any way.
it is, and that's what he wants us to recognize.
Yeah.
If you do this, give him approval to do it, give him time to go figure it out, let him go negotiate with Aptitude and finalize the contract.
It's gotta go on his timeline.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
I-
bringing
multiple apps into one, so.
I agree. If I get to say though, like, I have from July to August to figure out how to use myself, it's gonna take that long. It's new technology's hard.
So what we'd be approving would be the 16, 7,
I
20
think they don't mind though.
plus that and that.
You'd be approving the annual cost, the.
So you got your one-time deal,
Yep.
and then you got a,
No,
This will take
no,
care
this-
of
they're
School
reduced,
Connect
so this
too, right,
is,
Joe?
The 9250, Chris.
total
9250 is
Yes.
the total?
Yeah,
for the first year.
Okay,
Yep, they're discounting from the 16.7 to 92.50 for the first year.
and then 9250 annually,
Plus a five.
Plus a
the
five-
following year.
Plus a
Plus a
5% increase.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
Get it?
this will take the place of like Connect, our School Connect, those kinds of, because we don't use Remind anymore.
Well, we still use Remind, but this would
Oh.
take the place of Remind.
And School Connect for the elementary.
So as I'm looking at this, it appears as though it's going to be the $16,720.83. That's the development of the app, all of the back work that has to be done. And then in addition to that, you would also have your one-time development costs.
What's a discount? What's a discount of 7,000?
Discount of 7,000, so they're taking it off because it's not a full year.
Well, it's 7 less than 10. We have to verify with them, but I do think Karen's right that they're offering us it would be 16,720 if we took everything above, but they're offering us the discounted rate of 92.50. And next year the same, but it's subject to a % increase for.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and the discounts because of the time of the year.
No,
Time
that,
of renewal, maybe.
they're in a bit of a slow time right now and could do some of those things, is why they were aggressively trying to sell it to us at this point. I'm hesitant to say this publicly because they can hear it too. But what Phil said is Apogee has a very aggressive marketing team, and give him the room to go negotiate something with them, and he thinks he can get them to keep this, but extend the timeline for what works. That's what he's gonna try to do.
Good.
Okay,
Mhm.
so if we get this, what savings does the district have not having these other systems? I'm just curious what.
I don't know if it's savings as much as it is efficiency.
Okay,
And
Right.
transparency for the public and students and parents and.
okay.
Remind would be the one piece that you probably would not be renewing.
What do we pay for Remind? I'm sorry, I didn't even.
Don't know off the top of my head.
It's less than the.
It's less than this.
Yeah, way less than this.
And we might not be able to get rid of every aspect of Bound. Our calendar would move to this, but we use Bound.
But I think
for-
Remind may be going up next year as well, because they have been purchased by another group.
Okay.
And Jeff, in the public relations folder, there's feedback from every one of those 7 constituent groups. There's like 2 or 3 pages of notes about comparing this one, Donovan Group, which similar type work, except they would also be a content provider and would make your content. And then another one called CESO, which was.
That was out of Minnesota.
Center for Effective School Operations or something like that. And we compared the 3 packages, and across all 7 constituent groups, this was the one. And it consolidated and it made it so parents, teachers, it didn't matter what you were going. You want to know what the lunch menu was? It's there. You want to know if your sports practice was canceled? It's there. You want to know if we have weather cancellations? It's there. And so that's kind of where, yes, sir.
Did the gentleman from Apogee give you his number in the event that you need to clarify anything?
I had his cell number from his email, and we could just give that to Phil to clarify. So
Oh, yeah.
what I'm suggesting that we do, and this is where Phil can go clarify, but we're kind of locking into this. If we pre-authorized him up to that 92.50 value, he can go back and clarify everything, but he's only authorized up to 92.50, and it will also give him a little leverage with Apogee.
I'll move to approve up to 9250.
Then move in
Do I have a
second.
second?
Moved and seconded.
Okay, we have a motion by Chris, seconded by Jeff, to approve up to 92.50 for Apogee, and then allow Mr. Trimble and Joe to go negotiate details of that contract.
Joe, there's a phone number back here.
Any further questions? Anyone wish to speak against that before I call for a vote? All right, call for the vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay. Next, we have the Iowa Central School Counselor Agreement, which starts on page 25. Starts on page 29. Renewing a previous agreement.
Currently, they are providing us this service at no cost to the district. It's kind of a trial year.
How's that working?
I think it's been beneficial to our students to have this, and it's good support also for our high school, middle school counselor to have that extra person to kind of help with the career planning aspects of this. Especially given the number of dual credit type opportunities our students have with Iowa Central in particular. So it does help to navigate that for us. What I would recommend is the approval of it up to what we would receive as a district for additional funding, weighted funding through the state versus the 20,000. And they have indicated to other districts that they would be willing to do that up to what your additional funding is. So it doesn't come as an additional cost to your general fund.
Yes, and there's a cap, right? Because I don't see an employee, like a cap on the contract, so if they're making 100,000 and we were,
And if we have 20% of this person's time, does this person have more than 5 schools that they're offering at 20%?
I don't know how many
So-
schools they go to, but
Yeah, but I'm just saying, I could see where
That's a
that,
valid question, right? If we're paying 20%, but they're serving 10 schools, we're not getting the money's worth.
right,
well, it says in good, there's a clause in here for they're gonna give good faith and time. But it says in virtually, essentially,
I think they're
Yeah.
physically on campus though, approximately 1 day a week.
okay.
how long?
2 days.
2 days each? For how long? All day? All
This is,
year?
and I wanna make sure I understand, so like if a kid is taking an online course, this is like through Iowa Central, this is who kind of checks in with them and makes sure they're on track and helps with college planning and.
It's definitely the college planning
Yeah,
aspect.
it's more
of it.
like college planning and help with FAFSA. It's not just Iowa Central focused. It's more like, here's what you need to get into college successfully. Basically, any of those needs, as I understand it. But I mean, Andrew, your daughter probably has.
Yeah, but
used it.
she'll help with like, oh my gosh, I can't get into my book in my class. Can you help me figure, like at the beginning, I mean, she's here for lots of things. Like right now, they're trying to figure out what they want to do next year for college classes. And they were, like, my daughter was in there to talk to her today about maybe what she should sign up for and what semester she should do it.
They're good.
For lots of
And they
things.
help with planning for other colleges as well.
Yeah.
I mean, college in general.
Okay.
Yes, planning for college in general.
She does go to other schools. They do go, but it's not 10 schools. It's like, I think she goes to 3 maybe. I think it's 2, 2, and 1 something. There's multiples of these counselors that go to other schools in there.
We're getting her a full day a week.
At least
2 days.
one.
At
but I
least
think
one, maybe
sometimes she's
more.
here twice.
So Joe, what you were talking about, a different way to cap that verbiage would appear where? In the salary and payment section? Because I'm struggling to find the
It's gonna have to be changed in that salary and payment section,
It's
so
not in
instead
there.
of we find the number.
So 20% of the cost of salary, it's in section 6C, and it's at the beginning too, in 2A.
It is, but it doesn't actually tell you what that is.
And there's,
20% of their
20% of
unknown
what?
salary.
Yeah,
20% of
what
what?
is
with no
20%?
cap.
So would like a number on that, would like to see verbiage towards what you were talking about. The other thing, Joe,
I would just simply approve it based on what this district receives for weighted funding.
Yep, that will cap it.
Mhm.
Okay. Is there a way for item E to require that we at least have pre-approval and acceptance of those additional charges?
Yeah, but if you're going with the language I'm recommending to you, those other charges become moot. It's going to be based on your funding, your weighted funding, which is actually
So-
going to be less than the sum total
Okay.
of those others.
So you're talking about taking everything under section 6 would be rolled up into one statement that says we pay X according to our weighted schedule. Perfect.
And I would simply have them rework that contract to match that. But they have indicated that that is an option if we so choose.
Thank you, that's great.
Yeah.
That's really great.
You got more questions or a motion?
I will move to approve the contract with the change to be up into our funding.
All right, we have a motion by Sarah, seconded by Chris, to approve the Iowa Central Community College School Counselor contract with the change to section 6 to refer to payment as matching our weighted funds up to our weighted fund schedule. All right, any questions or anyone wish to speak against that motion? Call for a vote. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay. Next, we have the AEA purchasing agreement. Page 34.
Does this have changed all from last year?
Just basically allows you to participate in that funding. So I don't believe it's an actual change.
Okay.
Or in that purchasing power.
Cooperative?
So I saw that there's a minimum, that we would need to meet. Can't remember, but I think it is $500. Yeah, there we go, one, would be $500. Is there a requirement that we purchase everything through this contract, or can we just purchase where?
We go elsewhere as well,
Elsewhere,
just
okay.
where this is the better pricing,
Okay,
because it allows us to access some of those state contract bids.
okay, that's what I was just wondering. And is this affected by the change in AEA funding by the state at all?
Not that we're aware of right now.
We have a motion on the AEA purchasing agreement.
A second.
We have a motion by Jeff, seconded by Sheree, to approve the AEA purchasing agreement for 25-26. Do we have anyone who wishes to speak against or any questions about that motion? Okay, we'll call for a vote. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay. Next, we have a real estate purchase agreement for 206 Second Avenue Northwest. The purchase for a cost of $80,000.
I saw in here that it looks like someone has determined that they don't believe there was ever a tank underground or anything like that, so they're not taking on anything there. So can I move to approve the purchase
can.
of this property?
I have a motion by Sheree. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion by Sheree, seconded by Chris, to approve the real estate purchase agreement for 206 Second Avenue Northwest in Pocahontas. Do we have any additional questions or anyone wishing to speak against that motion?
When will it officially close?
We'll work through Connor for that. I'm not,
Oh, okay. I didn't know if we had an estimated time.
Yeah, I don't think there's a date.
It just says the date mutually agreed between the parties.
Any other questions or concerns? Okay, we'll call for a vote. All in favor of approving the real estate purchase agreement for 206 Second Avenue Northwest, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, next we have the approving the 25-26 school calendar, which is copied out on page 45. We have a motion.
I'll move to approve. I'll second.
We have a motion by Chris, seconded by Dina to approve the 25-26 school calendar. Do we have any questions or discussion? Anyone wish to speak against that motion?
I was just wondering on that first column, it says tentative state days paid with a colon, and then there's nothing, no answer there. Does there need to be anything there?
Right now, I believe that one was still up in the air, so
Okay,
we're looking at one. So that's why you see a one there.
oh, you have a one? Mine's.
It's blank on ours.
Yeah,
Joe.
that is blank.
Oh,
Right.
Tentative state days paid, colon, nothing there.
I don't know.
okay,
Except
but if
above
you
that.
go above,
Yeah.
Yes,
plus
one
state PD day.
plus
Yeah.
state PD.
there's one state paid PD day
You need that.
in this calendar. bill.
Okay, and that's what it's referencing
Yeah.
there? Okay.
We've shared this with Lorenz.
Yep.
Did they have any questions or
They
concerns?
didn't indicate any. They're waiting on you.
Anything else before I call for a vote? All right, all in favor of approving the 25-26 school calendar, please say aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, next we have fundraising requests. We have 3 tonight. We have girls golf. We'll be selling beef sticks for regional and state expenses, and that money is to be put in their activity fund. FBLA activity fund for club activities. Is there more detail behind that?
That's neat. We're doing the concession stand for the men's club tournament, so there'll be a concession stand, although it's on Saturday, so it doesn't affect any academic time.
Okay, so FBLA is running a concession stand club at Pomeroy's. It's a
Men's club.
men's
Men's
club
club,
basketball. Okay. And the funds for that will go to your club activities fund. And then the third item is baseball banners, which on page 48. These are to raise money for Pack baseball field and equipment, and it would be banners sponsored by local businesses to be hung around.
That would be an activity fund also.
And that fund would go, those monies would go to their activity fund.
And what's on the banners? Like advertising?
For the businesses.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, do we have a motion on the fundraisers?
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
the fundraisers.
We have a motion by Dina, seconded by Dustin, to approve the 3 fundraisers for girls golf, FBLA, and baseball. Before I call for a vote, do we have any questions or anyone wishing to speak against that motion?
Does anyone know how much the banners will cost?
I can ask.
I know, I kinda wanna know. Curious. Do they say how much they think they'll raise?
No.
Like,
Business
to it,
members?
I'm assuming that you were asking not what it would cost the school, because the business is gonna pay more for that. You were asking on behalf of the business.
No, what it costs as a business
No,
to
no,
rent one.
I don't think they'll know yet either until they get, because we have to get price quotes.
Do we have a motion?
I move to approve.
We
I already approved it.
Discussion, all right.
I already approved
I
it.
thought
I
we
need
did.
I need to call for a vote.
Come on, Tony, it's the first
All
time I
right.
put a motion
So
forward.
I'm calling for a vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. You get lost once in
No,
a while.
you're good. It's all good.
All right, discuss approve the disposal of 3 buses at auction. Pretty straightforward, but I don't know if Jeff had anything he wanted to add to that tonight, Karen?
He didn't say anything.
So following the process we had before, when we've gotten a new bus, we sell the old ones at auction. I'm sure that's what he's wanting to do here.
Going to the sale barn.
Yes.
I'll move to approve. So
Second.
disposal of the buses.
I'll second.
Too late, all right, then. We have a motion by Chris, seconded by Jeff,
Quiet tonight.
to approve the disposal of.
I don't know.
I can hear you just fine.
Aye.
Okay, so we have a motion by Chris, seconded by Jeff, to approve the disposal of 3 buses at auction. Do we have anyone who has any questions or wishes to speak against that motion? All right, I'll call for a vote. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Next, we have a open enrollment out request. Details behind parent A's request would be found on page.
Should we offer
50.
our online program?
Do you want to speak to that?
I don't
Andrew.
want to speak on that publicly. I don't feel like it's appropriate.
This is our recommendation. Without going into details.
Gotcha.
Do we have a motion for, parent A's request for open enrollment?
I'll move to approve open enrollment out.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion by Dustin, seconded by Chris, to approve the open enrollment out application. Does anyone have any questions or wish to speak against that motion? Call for a vote. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Could you repeat for me who made the motion in a second, since I missed that? Dustin.
Dustin and
Chris, thank you.
Okay, next item of business, we have Travis Squires, to talk to us about our 5-year budget projection model.
Take just like a minute recess and we'll get them set up and connected and.
Yeah, you say, do we have a motion to take
Go
a
into
recess?
recess.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Chris, seconded by Jeff, to go into recess.
Are they on now? Okay.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, we're temporarily at recess.
Oh, I didn't even see this. Okay.
Looks like it. Did you share screen?
So does it work if we just share our screen?
We just about got it here. Oh, nice start.
You're right there.
You should have stopped. Select your source. Screen and now select Tony. We should be.
I got it in.
Okay, here, we can see you.
I emailed Joe.
Travis,
On Facebook
can you
and I
hear
emailed
us
Joe.
Yep, I can hear you just fine.
They took a little bit of a recess right now so that I could get you guys up and rolling.
Perfect. Darren, looks like you could probably position that a little bit more.
Talk to you through how to do that. Full screen.
Yeah.
Is that a little better?
Yeah, I think that's good, Gary. You're gonna make it, okay.
How's that look, guys?
I'll make an extension.
What you doing?
We'll be able to zoom various locations too if we're trying to point something out, so no big deal.
As long as you guys can share, we're good, right?
Yep.
Yes, yes, it is in this one.
Okay, how are you?
You go see Jacob.
I don't know if you called that conference, but I guess you have the dates. I think after you said I got the dates.
Probably. You might be.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I did comment on that, I was like, this room was there. Yes, it is, yes. You never know if it'll work.
They didn't take her to
There's another new one, I can't remember what it is. Fun.
Yeah, we had because you know, at the, right there, they had that community who was all on summer. Mickey was like, "Wait, how does that?" She was like, "How did it basically borrow the whole?" She was like, she basically was done, and she's like, "Oh." Like, "Oh, what do we do?" Those are hard. Yes, yes, he did. He is excellent. She teaches a couple of them.
Our library.
She goes and then he wasn't. I was like, I can't see it in their stuff, so I was like, no, you can't. So they made, I was like, can you, I called, I was like, can you please take it over?
That would actually.
Because he didn't have his marks. Yeah.
I mean, for those trucks. Is
Knows more sign language than I do.
Thank you, all done. We got our kids out.
Yeah, Katie did that.
More.
Yeah,
We taught our babies that too.
Yeah.
Are we ready?
We are ready. Sarah, you ready?
I'll move to come out of recess.
We have a second to come out of recess.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Chris, seconded by Sheree, to come out of recess.
You guys talk.
Go.
You let him win
All in
our
favor?
last time.
Please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, we're out of recess.
Okay.
Travis?
Yeah, thanks for letting us join virtually. It's a little bit complicated because I'm on the road going mostly from memory and Garrett's in the office running the machine. So we'll if there's some awkward pauses and transitions, we'll work through that. But just by means of introduction, so Travis Squires and Piper Sandler, work with my partner here at POCA. Matt Gillespie is another partner in our office who has worked with the district on some of your capital financing work over the years. He's enjoying the vacation and allowing us to kind of work through our areas of expertise, which I worked hand in hand with Larry Sigel at Iowa School Finance Information Systems to develop a 5-year forecasting model for school districts. So that's what we're here to chat with you about. I have good news and bad news. The good news is the legislature just approved a bill that said that school districts can spend whatever they want next year. The bad news is that
So we lost you.
Oh.
A cliffhanger.
school districts are going to,
Garrett, we're losing him.
do we lose? Sorry.
The punchline died, Travis. We need to start over at, we can spend anything we want next year is the good news, and we got nothing after that.
No bad news. Well, the bad news is it's not at all true, or remotely true, or will it be true in any year.
There we go.
What we do have to deal with is school districts are facing very limited budgets in terms of how much increase is being allowed by the state legislature with respect to how much money you can spend in your general fund to educate students. What we built in terms of a forecasting model is designed to allow us to make reasonable assumptions, plug those assumptions into a model, and determine a spending opportunity, spending plan, spending limit, depending on how you want to view it over the next 5 years. And what the biggest metric that we try to get school districts to focus in on is a concept that we're going to call your unspent authorized budget. Now, you probably heard that term thrown around before, or UAB or spending authority. They all mean the same thing. And, you know, like normal school finance things, there's acronyms and terms that sound very similar. But the spending authority is essentially the amount of spending the state legislature is going to allow you to utilize next year. It's a combination of enrollment, what we call state supplemental assistance, or the amount of revenue per student they will allow you to spend in your general fund. There's various, what I'll call kind of weighted options where certain students are counted as more than 1.0 in terms of a student count. And all of that money generates an amount each year that you can spend. We're going to call that amount break-even spending or current year authority. And that number then is compared to the amount you actually spend. If you run a positive variance, you add to your spending authority. If you run a negative variance, meaning expenses are more than your current year authority, you're going to spend down your spending authority. Right now, at the end of FY24, your last official fiscal year that's on the books, the school district had approximately $3.3 million of spending authority. that sounds like a pretty sizable and, substantial amount until you look at that as a percentage of your current year authority. As a district, you spend, I think a little bit over, $11 million per year in your general fund. And so an amount of 3.3 million represents a ratio right around 25 to 30%. In terms of, healthy ratios, we can talk about, whether that target should be somewhere between 15 and 25, 15 and 20. Whatever ratio is, chosen by the district, it's at least an option for you to weather the storm should you have a few tough enrollment years. So we do encourage districts to think about keeping some spending in the authority reserve. And maybe instead of thinking of it as a ratio, it might be closer to, somewhere between 2.4 and 2.8 million as a good long-term spot for spending authority. A couple other metrics that we view as important. One would be a ratio that we'll call solvency ratio. So if you're kind of looking at the top of this screen that Garrett has in there, Garrett, if you want to zoom in so you can just kind of focus in on that top section there. Solvency ratio is more of a cash-based metric. Essentially what it's telling you is how much cash do you have in the bank relative to the amount of money that you have or that you're spending on an annual basis. And so right now that ratio is in the low 20s as well. I would argue that ratio is maybe a little bit higher than you'll want it to be long-term. Most school districts land somewhere between 13 to 18% on solvency ratio. But it's also very important to note that your solvency ratio is not nearly as important as your unspent authorized budget number that's shown at the top. So as we work through solving for a financial scenario and trying to determine financial health of the district, the first thing that we have to do is walk through how do you land at expected break-even spending authority amounts, and how do you allocate spending relative to that amount. So that's an okay primer. You'll note that there's another metric up there that's property tax rate. While it is something that school districts certainly do care about, it's not the most important metric in determining the district's financial health. As a school board, you are essentially fiduciaries of the district's resources. And part of that resource amount is making certain that if the state allocates you dollars to spend, are you using those appropriately? In other words, you're not just underspending on your students and building up a large amount of spending authority, because ultimately that would be cheaper for the taxpayers. In a sense, you would be undereducating, so to speak, or underspending on education programming for your students relative to other school districts in the area. So all school districts in Iowa deal with this concept of spending authority. Certainly as board members, and obviously taxpayers of your district, either direct or indirect, you also care about property taxes. And so you do want to be good stewards of the tax resources that you receive, but we need to understand how that all fits together. And I think hopefully by the time we're through with this analysis, we'll at least be able to talk through what we see as either pressure points or opportunities within the school district's financial condition, and then be able to answer questions as to why we think your scenario either needs to be cautious on either wage increases or needs to plan for future cuts, or potentially needs to plan that you're going to have opportunities to spend resources in various areas. So Garrett, I think you're still operating in that first version of the model, is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. So within this financial model, we're gonna take you through a couple different scenarios. This first scenario is one that I would say paints a pretty tough picture for the school district. And we'll just kind of go through real briefly what a few of the assumptions are here. But if you look at FY '25, so this current fiscal year, based on spending projections at the district level and authority estimates that are built in, there's a thought that your spending authority will end with about $3 million this year. Now, your tax rate has already been set for FY '25. That was set last year. So at 8.77 is your tax rate. You know, obviously one of the lowest tax rates in the state. As you look at those next two numbers, I would view those both in a fairly healthy position, maybe slightly better than your long-term target ratio, but not in a situation where you need to have any sort of, what I'll say, methodical spend down plan implemented as a school district. What you see as you roll forward through the next 4 years then is your spending authority hangs on for a couple years in a pretty good spot. 2.9 million, 2.6 million, and then all of a sudden, as you look forward into FY '28, '29, and '30, you see a pretty dire position being shown right here. In this case, you see your spending authority actually goes negative in that 5-year plan. Now, this is not meant to be a shock and awe session, but essentially the assumptions that are built into this model is taking an enrollment scenario that largely ages kids both grade by grade based on where they're at right now, and forecast an incoming kindergarten class that's been similar to where you've been over the last 5 years. Obviously, we know there's a few enrollment things going on within the district with respect to some whole grade sharing and a parochial school, but we worked with your administration team to locate an enrollment forecast. So using that enrollment forecast and an estimate of 2.5% growth in state supplemental funding on an annual basis, if we assume that the district increases its expenses at 3% per year, with the enrollment loss and only getting 2.5% of SSA, which has been slightly above the average over the last 5 years, the district would run out of spending authority by year 5, without making any, let's say, drastic changes or limitations on how much wage increases might go up. Garrett, if you want to bring up the second model now.
Travis, before you go on from that, 2 questions. One, are we gonna have access to this tool to break it down after the meeting? And in each of these scenarios, where do you state the overall total assumptions that go into feeding that scenario?
We're gonna walk through those assumptions in a little bit more detail in the next model.
And
So bear with me one moment here as Garrett brings up the next model.
so when it says FY 2025, does that mean June 30, 2025?
Yeah, so fiscal years, that's assuming the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2024 through fiscal year end, June 30th, 2025.
Okay, thank you.
So that's the current fiscal year we're working with. So this second model makes one adjustment that we wanted you to be aware of. That is an assumption that's working right now. And this assumption, which we think is realistic, puts into place a scenario where last year, the district received spending authority for your special education programming, and you did not spend all of the allocated programming dollars in your special education program. Now, this happens from time to time. A lot of times it will happen simply because a school district can't hire the amount of associates they want to hire. And so going into this year, it's believed that you will not have that same special education surplus or underspending on your special education programming, which was about $200,000 last year. So this scenario makes only one change from the one I just talked about. And this is going to be the base scenario for how we're gonna walk through the rest of the assumptions. Now, if you do continue to run a special education surplus and you're not spending all the authority that you're allocated, you're going to end up more like that first model. But there's a lot of assumptions in here. We're gonna go page by page, and the best way to think about this is the first thing we're gonna talk about is all of the things that contribute to calculating your break-even spending number. Second, we're gonna talk about expenses. And then third, we'll talk about revenues, although I would argue that in your particular scenario, revenues are not that big of a deal, because we are showing essentially a stable tax rate. But we'll talk about why we think that will continue. So as we work through assumptions here, Garrett, if you go ahead and roll back to that Get Started tab, we're just gonna roll through a quick look at assumptions, and we're gonna go to that SSA rate again. Now, we started all of our meetings last fall, and just as a background, we do a fall conference every year where we host about 200 school districts and doing a 5-year forecast. So they show up to the meeting, we walk them through setting up their model, we talk to them about their toggles and what they can change. And then there are some districts, somewhere between 50 and 100 that engage our firm or Iowa School Finance Information Services to take a deeper dive into your scenario. So you're getting that deeper dive right now, and we want to walk through these assumptions. Now, current bills out there right now is that there is one bill that assumes that you will get 2% new funding on a per pupil basis, and another bill that will give you 2.25. And it gets a coin flip as to which one ultimately will get done. Right now, we have 2 in there. We could easily flip it to 2.25. It will modestly change a few assumptions, but the big picture scenario will still remain largely the same in terms of the narrative and the key takeaways. If you go to the enrollment tab next, Garrett, we do give multiple ways to forecast. So go ahead and, if you can see, there's a drop-down menu there, and we can either change by a flat number each year, a percentage change, or we can look at the number of students grade by grade, age them through the system, make various assumptions as to how many kids are coming over from LM and how many kids are currently, when they hit their, 6th grade year, moving over from parochial, as well as an assumption as to how many students are currently in your TK program or your transitional kindergarten. Because they do get reported as kindergarten, but essentially in terms of school funding formulas, but they don't turn into first graders, which would be, aging through the system. So Garrett, if you kind of zero in on looking at these changes, you can see how a few of these numbers flow through, and, in particular, a really small kindergarten class in place this year. Now, as you look at these changes, one thing I'll note here is that these are what we would call your beds enrollment count, or commonly called butts in seat. How many kids are you actually educating? And we use this change as a proxy for resident enrollment. It's not perfect, but it gives you a good proxy for change. And in this case, we're seeing changes over the next 4 years of -19, -20, -6, and -23 on the PK, on the K through 12 numbers there. And those are the figures then that flow through certified enrollment. Now, before we go any further here, I do want to point out one component that we will utilize when we're talking about a forecast, and that is making the best one-year decision with respect to your budget that you can make with the 5-year plan or 5-year forecast in mind. And so I'll keep coming back to that because, ultimately you don't want to make a decision that's knee-jerk, meaning, oh wow, the cohort enrollment shows that, we might lose 65 kids right now. We better right-size our budget for the fact that those kids are gonna be gone by the 5th year. Because the reality is that you will have each year new assumptions that come true. You'll know a new enrollment number, you'll get a new valuation number for calculating your taxes. The state legislature will set the state supplemental assistance number. So there's constantly moving assumptions that give new data. And so the idea is that you do this 5-year forecast each year and you reset your assumptions and expectations. And, to take a little bit of the, pressure or air, or, what I'll say, kind of the, maybe if you're feeling like, there's an agenda here. The thing that I want to point out is that we are not, when you get to the end of our target scenario that we'll move to last, we are not putting in place a large recommendation to make any sort of major cuts out of your budget based on this cohort enrollment that might show that you could lose a bunch of kids over the next 4 years. And the reality is that your budget, so to speak, isn't on fire. You've got a strong cumulative balance that will allow you to weather the storm clouds for a year, potentially, as you wait to see what the next enrollment drop happens. But we think it's important that boards start thinking forward as to how the 5-year budget is impacted by these assumptions. So the current scenario is using the cohort enrollment. And if you look now at the top scenario, you can see that by year 2030, you're falling out of target on all of your metrics. And I would argue that spending as a target for current year authority, I would actually recommend that be 15 to 25, not 10 to 15. But again, you can set your own targets. We just find with rural districts that things can swing so quickly with respect to enrollment, especially for school districts that have a parochial school presence with the new ESA rules in place. We don't love to see that trend line. So even more important probably than the end result of the numbers is making sure that the trend lines stay favorable. Sorry, it sounded like you were trying to.
I just
jump in
want
while I was talking.
Quick question to understand your top level assumption. So you're working this across based on the total served enrollment. You're showing over the 5 years that that's dropping away by more than 10%. Are you keeping the top line expenses the same, or did you subtract 10% away from those? Is that a role? How did you come to, as we go from 676 students to 599 students, what did you do to the payout if you have less students for the revenue in?
Yeah, so a good point right here is to go back to, we're first gonna walk through the assumptions that are built only around spending authority, and then we're gonna go to expenses. So if it's slow and methodical, my apologies, but just trying to work through the assumptions. Right now, we've kept that your spending goes up still 3% per year. You are correct, you would not see this scenario, you would make an adjustment. We're gonna help show you how to calculate what type of adjustment you will make, because most likely, we understand that most districts are gonna have to give away, I'll say give away, you'll do wage increases, you'll do benefit increases for your staffing that are already in place. And then you have to look at how do you manage those items. So right now, we still have 3% built into that. We will show you the adjustments that we think would balance out what I'll call as a target scenario. So I'm trying to show you how the status quo of just assuming that spending can go up 3% per year doesn't work in your model with your enrollment scenario. Which, that may be plainly evident to everybody in the room, but we're gonna show you how the math exercise works. So as we work through.
Appreciate that, Travis. One more quick question, sorry. Yep.
Go ahead.
Can you go back to the enrollment numbers?
Yep. Derek? Yep.
Okay, and so it made sense where you were dropping off a class of 71 from the senior class and bringing in a kindergarten class of 54, where some of those numbers were dropping off. This isn't the table I'm referring to. I'd like the one where you show K through 12.
Yeah, just scroll down a little bit here.
Yep, okay, so understand the difference between a 12th grade class dropping off at a bigger number than a PK coming in. What I don't understand looking through these is why I can't follow it diagonally. So why is kindergarten this year 43, but next year it's 33 in first grade? Why is kindergarten the next year 30, but the year after that it's 20 in first grade? Why isn't the same class following through at the same number?
So you have a TK program, transitional kindergarten program, that currently has kindergartners counted, but they end up counting for 2 years.
So in other words, our prep, those kids don't all move
to first grade
together. And some of those actually move then to Pocahontas Catholic after going through our prep program.
Yeah, other place, once you have a year going forward, 60 stays 60, stays 60, the next year's down, but there are other places that's not true. And I follow the same class across and all of a sudden kids dropped out. So trying to understand where that loss of bodies are.
Yeah, so there are what we would call shocks to the standard cohort, which you could just simply say, hey, we had a family move in, we could allocate those kids mid-year. But what we've tried to do is take up a few of the major inputs. And again, these are assumptions, just trying to get a good metric for going forward, or at least a realistic enrollment case scenario. So in this case, we're adding in kids, Garrett, that's sixth grade from Pocahontas Catholic, correct? Yep, correct. And then you have whole grade sharing kids also being shown here as well.
7. And in first grade, you're showing a minus because some of those kids are going to Pocahontas Catholic.
That makes sense.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
And then I just have an overall question. Is there any way to predict in any of this with your assumptions, what in the world happens with the Department of Education changing federally? I mean, could we expect funding to go up through the state if the federal changes?
Yeah, so the best I've been able to see is that, federal spending as a total, like, share of overall education spending is somewhere around 8%. Joe might have better numbers than me. In the state of Iowa, though, a lot of those dollars flow through, both, food programs, nutrition programs, and Title IX. There's not a lot that goes into federal funding for school districts, absent the last couple of years where we had, outsized support from, ESSER, COVID relief money. So I don't see federal changes making a major difference on anything local and at the state level. Joe, I don't know if you have any other thoughts there.
No, I would echo those.
Okay. All really good questions so far. Because really we drilled into one of the biggest drivers of your financial forecast, which will be your enrollment. Which again is why you can't make your 5-year spending plan and just live with it. You have to adjust to what's happening with your enrollment trend on an annual basis. So, first off, just trying to understand where it's going to be next year. Your FY26 funding is already set based on your fall 2024 enrollment. So our enrollment forecast, we're trying to guess what next year's enrollment is going to be. That impacts funding or spending authority for FY27, or the fiscal year that begins July 1, 2026. So it's important to note that the enrollment number that we're using for the FY26 budget, in terms of how much funding the state's going to give you, that's already known. We already know what that enrollment is. It was up from last year. However, because you had an enrollment drop the year before, you don't get credit for all of the new students that show up. There's a concept called budget guarantee, which we'll talk through it a little bit later. So are we good to move on from enrollment here?
So, yes.
We can always come back to it. So the next tab over then, I think, is special education.
Yep.
And the things that I want to point out here is that there are classifications within special ed, and you guys, I apologize if I'm speaking to things you are already aware of here. But whether they're a level 1, level 2, or level 3 student, that student is assigned more than the normal $8,000 per student. Because of those various allocations, you will generate additional money in your special education program, which then has to be compared against all of your special education spending and how it's coded. If you were to look at the district's history, there have been years in which you've actually spent more than you're allocated for your special education programming. That's commonly called a special ed deficit. And I would say most school districts in the state do that. In part because the way that you are spending in your special education program is driven by that student's individualized education plan, or IEP. And there are times when, especially school districts might have a level 3 student that is transported off campus or not even, on the district's campus, and say they open enrollment out, you would get billed back by that other school district. So most districts do run a slight deficit there, and in part just because of the low state funding per pupil numbers that have been present over the last 5 to 7 years. Special education deficits have grown a lot at the statewide level, in part due to advocacy efforts by parents who might advocate for these programs. But the last 2 years, the district has actually run a surplus. We did see quite a few districts running surpluses during, the COVID years as some districts received ESSER money that was allocated in the Medicaid funding, or there was additional dollars that came through in Medicaid. And then because of that, they ran a either smaller deficit or a slight surplus that was unexpected. In this model, we are assuming that the district returns to essentially a break-even funding scenario. If you run a deficit, that will increase your spending authority, but it also increases your expenses. You do not get penalized as a district with spending, in terms of spending authority, if you spend more than what you're allocated to. The state grants you additional funding if you spend more than the allocated amount in your special education program. This is the only place where the state essentially gives you unlimited authority. Now, if you don't spend what you allocated, then you lose.
Helping us part-time. I was sharing, Travis, part of our special ed issue here is because of not being able to fill all of our positions with full-time staff.
Correct. Yeah, and that's been really common throughout the state. A lot of districts have received or had reductions in their deficits over the last couple of years. So this is one component of spending authority, because we need to understand how you're going to operate relative to the funding levels that you receive in your weightings based on level 1, level 2, or level 3 students. So now we're just going with a baseline scenario. You'll know more when you get done with this year. So going into next year's forecast, you can be a little bit more closely aligned with expectations. But again, we're probably within a $200,000 variance here, either way, that we need to plan for. The next couple tabs in the spreadsheet are just various items that we've talked with your administration team regarding other areas where you get spending authority. All districts run a dropout prevention program where you're allocated a certain amount of dollars in that program. A lot of times this goes to help support your counseling, your school counselors, some other at-risk programs that might exist within the school district. The next one over then is supplementary weighting. If the district were to take on any sort of operational sharing, you do get some weighted dollars for community college concurrent enrollment. Those are all factored in to just sort of be what I'll call status quo, no change from where they were in prior years. As you move forward, there's the instructional support levy. So all districts but one in the state of Iowa have this. Your district does do the maximum 10% of instructional support levy, and you do fund that with a mix of property tax and income surtax. So we're not assuming any sort of changes there into that program, but it is something that generates spending authority outside of your enrollment, which is why, we're kind of working through these tabs here to get to an amount that will be relevant for your break-even spending number. The next one is modified supplemental amount. This one is a little bit harder to predict as a school district. There are some numbers that you get new estimates annually, and one of those would be open enrollment out, not on the prior year's count. So we do have that factored into this analysis I think there probably should be a number there, whether that number is 50,000 on an annual basis going forward. Karen, you probably do have that number, that grant application for this current FY25 year.
I do, but I don't have it with me.
Do you have a ballpark for where it is?
I want to say it's about in that, No, I can't estimate it right offhand. I'm sorry, Travis.
Okay. No, it's okay. Gary, why don't you just plug 75 in there?
Yeah.
Because that's kind of been close to an average. And what this number represents is that each year, you might have open enrollments that weren't on the prior year count. So a kid that, for example, since you get funding based on enrollment from the fall of 24, if that kid leaves, the state tries not to penalize you for a kid that isn't there on count date that you were counting on from the prior year. So because of that, the way that your budget is set, you'll get a one-time grant of funding. Now, this shows it as continuing for 5 years, which, may be relevant, which is why I had Garrett plug that in there, as a number. Additional things that you get if you have an increase in enrollments in the fall. Since, let's say, this current year, FY 25, you added 9.8 kids. Your budget for FY 25, though, was based on your fall 23 enrollment, which was 10 kids. So,
We're losing you, Travis.
one-time funding of 77, you'll get one time to educate those kids in this current fiscal year. So FY 25. So since your budget was based on fall 23 enrollment, those kids showed up on October 1,
You're gonna get funding for those.
and basis to educate those students. Yeah, so that's really the function of this other place. It's again, other authority beyond just simply the enrollment times the SSA. The last component then is miscellaneous income. And this is really any funding that the school district receives that isn't property taxes or state aid.
Like grants?
And so one-time grants would show up in here, open enrollment dollars that you might receive would show up in here. Whole grade sharing dollars would show up here. All of your ESSER money that you received over the last 5 years would also show up here. And so what we've done so far is put in an estimate of a reduction in your miscellaneous income. And because of that, we're using that number going forward. So this is, again, an estimate right now, and we are showing at about 2.8 million of miscellaneous income for FY 25. And that jives fairly closely with the district's line item budget on where they're anticipating revenues to end up.
And that $600,000 drop in the 2020.
That's ESSER
That's
dollars.
ESSER dollars that have been
COVID.
spent, that are now gone.
Correct. So then we just use that as a small increase going forward, to be semi-conservative. Now, at this point, we've basically walked through every number that would be a component of your generated spending authority for the year. So as we go to this expenses tab, and Gary, why don't you go ahead and just zoom in a little bit on that line item for break-even spending?
Hey, Travis.
So in FY, yeah,
This is Karen. Hey, I do have those numbers. If you want to go to the MSA thing, you can plug them in right quick.
yeah, sure.
The open enrollment out on prior year would be 118,747. And the EL
And then
instruction.
Gary,
the-
Gary, why don't you use 80% of that going forward as the estimate, then in FY 26 and beyond?
And then, the EL one is $49.93.
Perfect, thanks.
Thanks, guys.
So now, now as you get to expenses, we're gonna come up with an FY '25. And actually, maybe it's best to look at FY '24. So in FY '24, we're showing break-even spending of 11.4 million versus expenses of 11.2. As we work into the current fiscal year, FY '25, you will see break-even spending estimate at 11.2, expenses at 11.23, so 11.28 versus 11.23, spending about 99.5% of your budget. And that, I think those estimated expenditures, Karen's reviewed those, and those align pretty closely to expectations within the line item budget as they sit right now. So all in all, it looks to be a fairly good year. Your ratios will stay very similar to where they were in FY '24, provided that we hit these spending metrics, as well as the revenue metrics, with respect to spending authority, and get your special ed deficit along. So what we've got here now on this expense tab is a little bit more in detailed summary. So we have those same key indicators up at the top. You can see that those metrics improved a little bit going out. We're now showing 1.9 million of cumulative authority at the end of 5 years, basically due to adding that modified supplemental authority for open enrollment out and that on the prior year's count. But the issue that we see with your budget isn't really for next year or the year after per se. It's when you get to FY '28 and beyond, if you have these same sort of enrollment declines that would be forecasted with that cohort method. So you go from plugging along spending 99.5, 98, to 99, to 102, to 105, to 106% of your budget, if you continue to spend 3% more each year without making any sort of adjustments in your staffing. Now, you might say, well, yeah, if we lose 10% of our enrollment, why wouldn't we cut 10% of our staffing? And the reality is it might not be that simple, because it might be something where your class sizes all of a sudden get much smaller, but you're not able to change the number of sections that you have available. So in considering that, the biggest issue that we see is controlling the amount of spending you're getting and starting to identify where you might be able to make adjustments with these expenses. When we look at these numbers, and in particular, the scary number for me is when you get out to year 5. And if you were to simply say, yeah, you know what, we're trucking along, we've got $2.7 million in spending authority at FY '29, everything looks good. And then you look into the next year and you can see the rate at which you're dropping spending authority would be the concern there, both in 29 and 30. And what happens here with spending when you're losing enrollment is you will get to a scenario where each year you're given a certain amount of revenue per pupil. If you lose enrollment, you're guaranteed 1% increase on the regular program cost. And if you lose again the next year, you get 1% on the regular cost. But the factors that come into this is if you were to look at what's happening, and Garrett, I think if you go back to the expenses tab and scroll off to the right. Is that where we put that?
It was in the other, well,
Oh, yeah, sorry, never mind. We'll go back to that. Okay. If you look at this, that UAB tab, the concern that we have with your model right now is between regular program and your budget guarantee in FY '25, you had 5,232,000 in your, what I'll call your regular program. If you go to FY '29, in your regular program, you have 5,338,000. That's a growth of $106,000 in your regular program over a 4-year period of time. And what does that due to? That's due to being on budget guarantee. So the 1% growth number that is allowed is that yellow highlighted number that I'm showing there. But the problem is that the 1% for the next year doesn't grow on the sum of the top two lines, but it only grows on the top one. And so what happens is that when you have this declining enrollment, it feels like, hey, the state's guaranteeing me 1% growth. The problem is they take away the 1% guarantee from the prior year every year. So what happens is that this enrollment decline, when it happens 2 out of 3 years or 3 out of 4 years, can lead to a cliff that we want to make certain that you can see in advance and plan for. Now, once again, as I've already stated a few times, we're not recommending that you make any sort of spending adjustments this year in terms of changing staffing. But one thing we would say is that you have to be mindful for how various changes with respect to wage increases can exacerbate a problem that you already have on the horizon. So if we go back to expenses, and again, we just assumed 3% changes here each year. Gary, why don't you go into FY '26 expenses here in option 2. And we're just gonna look at changing salaries and benefits in FY '26. And the number I want you to think about is, at the end of 5 years right now, Gary, you're gonna have to hard plug those first. So hard plug all of those at 3%. And you can see at the end of FY '30, we have 1.9 million of spending authority. Let's say, for example, in FY '26, because you're in a good position with your budget, you know, and I see it like, oh, it looks like you might only spend 98% of your budget in FY '26. Why don't, instead of giving 3% wage increases, we do 5? So let's do 5 on wages and benefits. So if I look up in FY '26, I'm only spending 99.46% of my budget. Looks really good. But when I look out in year 2030, I've spent down my authority by $950,000 additional from where I was already spending down my authority. In this case, your solvency goes negative, your UAB ratio drops below 10%, and the district is now overspending your budget by $984,000 in that year. In other words, you have to come up with a cut of 9% out of your budget to get back to break even. So as we kind of back into, go ahead and change that back to 3%. You know, one of the functions that we have right now is that we only have SSA rates going up at 2.5, and we have spending going at 3. So you might be saying, well, that's kind of unrealistic. Why would we assume that? Well, that's been the reality of school districts over the last 5 years, as you've had to pay staff more than what you're getting in new money. So unfortunately, that's part of the reality that we're facing as school districts across the state. So with all that good news, how would you go ahead and put this into a more targeted approach? Now, Gary, you're gonna have to go back in and add the MSA amounts. So bear with us here a second, as we tried to preload a scenario so you didn't have to watch us enter numbers in. Behind me doing book here. Yeah. So what we put together here is what I'll call more of a targeted scenario. And Gary, we got a little bit too much going on cuts here, so go ahead, since we have that new authority in there, go ahead and take that down to negative 150 and negative 1528. If the district were to go ahead and do 3% increases this year, and you had a goal of trying to maintain your spending authority at a very similar level to where it's at right now, the district could give 3% wage and salary increases and 3% kind of expenses in the other categories, and still maintain a solid ratio. Now, you do see FY28, we basically made cuts or illustrated cuts for cost savings, or we're showing it in 2 lines right now. It could be that you decide to take part in natural gas risk sharing pool, or you find some other efficiencies within your operating budget. We're just showing it on the salary benefit lines for now. But that is to bring you back to break-even spending in 28. We allow the spending authority to ramp up to 102 again in 29, and then we're showing additional expenditure adjustments in FY30. I think I could make a case, Garrett, that you could spread out FY28's adjustments into FY29. So if you did 75, 25 in each of those years, really what you might be looking at based on lost enrollments, are there any positions of attrition that you might try to identify over that period of time, ultimately with the goal of trying to stay under 101% spending of your current year's budget. So that's kind of the standard metrics that we would take you through of, how would you continue to operate this going forward. You do see an FY27 to 30, you did change your expenditure increases to simply match where SSA was coming in. But we certainly think that you might have the opportunity this year to do, 3% on salaries and benefits, even though you might only get 2 or 2.25% SSA. Your district has been operating the budget very frugally. And you've been in a good position, but the budget guarantee is what's kind of catching up with you as you play this forward a few years. So you do have to be mindful of whenever I see expenditure adjustments or having expense increases that only at the SSA rate. Anytime we have a position for attrition come up, I think they just have to be evaluated by the administration team to make certain that over the 5-year period of time, you're landing where you want to land. Now, if instead of losing 20 kids next year, you simply remain stable, we're going to reset all of those adjustments and cuts out there in years 3, 4, and 5. In fact, you might not have any sort of adjustments you have to make in this 3, 4, and 5 if you simply don't lose 20 more kids next year. And then maybe you'll end up that way. I think the important thing that we would just want to point out is based on what we can assume on enrollment, and you can poke holes in it. We could, be a little bit more aggressive on that in terms of, not showing your drops being quite as heavy. And that might result in that you don't have to make any expenditure adjustments out there in years 3, 4, and 5. But I don't think it would really give you much license to settle really any higher than 3% SSA, without upsetting the apple cart. Again, trying to make the best one-year budget decision without jeopardizing the 5 years into the future. Now again, we're doing math exercises. You guys are boots on the ground, trying to provide budgets to educate students. So we don't know everything that you're facing in terms of pressures, but a lot of these problems that, we are seeing, looking at enrollment, et cetera, that are coming true in your district are also true in other districts across the state. Now, we've certainly carried this conversation on for about an hour, which I usually find is the max for anybody to want to think about school finance, especially when your school board meetings start at 7 o'clock. At that point, people are ready to be done with this. So the other thing I'll add here is that when we look at the revenue side of the equation, the property tax rate, ignoring what's going on with some of these property tax bills, we really see the ability for the district to maintain a pretty stable tax rate. Your solvency ratio stays pretty healthy. Could there potentially need to be some adjustments slightly higher in future years? And I would say that would only be true if your district started to run a special ed deficit, meaning you're spending more special ed dollars than you're given for authority. Because if you overspend on special ed, that does have to be funded with cash reserve levy when those cash reserve levies become available. Cash reserve levy is not currently available to you since your solvency ratio is north of 20%, but just something to keep in mind down the road as you think about things that you'll want to manage. But yeah, property tax rates staying in that 870 range. It looks pretty stable for your taxpayers going forward. So that being said, I'll go ahead and hit pause, turn it over to Joe if he has anything to add. Garrett, I didn't mean to dominate the whole thing, but I appreciate you driving for me as we're working through this meeting. And then Karen, if you have anything else to add based on some of the conversations that we've had before today.
The only thing I would probably add for you as a board, watch closely what's happening to your elementary numbers. Keep in mind that to operate an elementary program, on average, it's about 75% of the per pupil amount. You don't have to have all the required, right? At the high school level, it's almost 125% of the per pupil. So if your elementary numbers cut, you don't have the funds to continue operating those programs at the secondary level. And that's what happens in a lot of districts. And we have that potential here. I believe we had in 52 for preschool. Our reality is we may be closer to 40 for next year. If those type of numbers continue, that's going to continue to erode this more than what this model currently shows you. So you just need to watch it, those elementary numbers, closely, because they will impact your secondary programming. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I had one quick curiosity question, Travis. I think you could answer it really quickly. Where you're showing the drop in 2028 and 2030, it basically represents 3 people in 2028 and roughly 5 in 2030. What if you took one person per year that you would lose to whatever form and didn't replace them? So basically it looked somewhere along the lines of 50-30 across all 5 of those years. What would that play out if you reduce staff by 1 head count without replacing them manually over the next 5 years? It comes to roughly, I think, the same number. I'm just curious what it would play out at.
Yep, yeah, it's gonna be about the same number. It's a total number of cuts. The only difference if you're cutting sooner, Gary, you added those instead of subtracting them. So the only difference that would be is that you maintain a slightly higher cumulative spending authority. over that 5-year period of time. Where I'd argue you're not to the point where you need to cut. And to my comment earlier, anytime we're showing cuts on the 5-year model, we would recommend that districts think about every position of attrition in terms of, would I want to rearrange this differently over the 5-year? If I've identified that over a 5-year period of time, we're gonna have to cut, 600,000 or whatever the number is out of the budget, how might I do that differently? And I think in this case, we end up a little bit short of where you need to be, in terms of positions. As you're still spending about 101.7. So I'd still probably say the pace at the enrollment decline probably does push those last 2 years to be just a little bit heavier. And, if we're putting 100,000 on salaries and 30,000 on benefits there, we're talking 1 position for 3 years and 2 positions in the last 2 years, Garrett, I think would get us there. We're pretty close to there. It'd be a very similar position. Does that make sense? Is that helpful?
It does. It came out really close to the same number, kind of what you're showing us, like with all other things, if we act a little sooner, we may not have to act as extremely in the end.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I have a question too. If we assume that in 2025, we paid $250,000 in one-time fees we won't pay over the next 5 years, how does that change it?
In FY 25, or was it 24?
Or 24?
Basically, last
Is
year had
there
some one-time expenses that wouldn't be carried forward, was kind of where that question was coming
Like,
from.
that was all part of it. That should,
Yeah, we've already
that's
backed.
already been figured in
Yeah,
there.
that was,
That's already been figured in.
Pomeroy?
Well, we're talking about the Palmer expenses we had last year that we wouldn't have going forward, not
That's
money
already
we
been
had
figured in
last.
there.
The ESSER one was money we had that we're not going to have. This is the other way saying expenses we had that we're not going to have.
That was already figured in there when I did these expenses, knowing that Pomeroy was not going to be here next year. I took all the electricity and the insurance and all that out of there.
Good job. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we got the change from FY 24 to 25. But if there was something that you're spending on in 25, but you're not gonna spend in 26,
That's gonna go.
for example, then we would pull out additional dollars.
Yeah.
From this model. One example that we also talked about real briefly, there's the natural gas risk sharing pool. It's an insurance product, so, whatever you kind of say about insurance, it is. I think districts have had varying success with this program, but essentially it allows you to buy a share of a risk sharing pool out of your management fund and use dollars of your management fund to help pay for some of your natural gas costs. In that case, it's a decrease in your general fund expenditures, but it would be an increase in your management fund expenditures.
Which is
So you're
your
not
tax rate.
Tax rate to go
necessarily
up a little.
saving dollars, but you would actually probably have to increase the levy slightly, but you might be able to change the math on how many cuts we're illustrating in that model. And then when we say cuts, I kind of hate to use that term because if you lose 10% of your enrollment, is that really a cut? Or are you just simply right-sizing your budget to your new enrollment needs? Cut has a really negative connotation to it. And I don't think it's appropriate because you're just trying to build a budget based on resources that are available. And sometimes that means looking at, well, what do we do if we have 10% less students over a 4 more enrollment periods? Yeah, we're gonna have to make some changes. And I think this is just helping you understand the magnitude of the changes and how it impacts your ratios going forward. So that would be a further illustration that we could do in here. And again, I don't think anything's on fire with your budget, but I think it's just there's some smoldering with enrollment that we have to analyze over the next couple of years. My hope is that when we meet again in the fall, your enrollment's flat, and we can take some of these adjustments out. You know, another year down the road of doing enrollment forecasting, you start, or overall budget forecasting, and you start fine tuning assumptions. As a board, you start to get more comfortable. We don't really want to own this model as, you know, our own thing. We want this to be a tool for the school board and the administration team to use to make good decisions going forward.
Appreciate that very much, Travis. Anybody else have any other questions?
I even closed my eyes.
Any other questions for Travis while we have him? Thank you, Travis.
Thanks,
Very
Thanks, Travis.
educational.
Thank you, Garrett.
And Garrett.
And Garrett, yes. Thanks for driving, Garrett.
Thanks, everyone.
Very informative. Okay, pick up some speed here again. Discuss approve ag plan to purchase new welders and place old welders on auction. Next item on our agenda. On page. Any details about that?
It's right at.
There it is. It's on page 56. Mr. Waller gave us some information on what he is hoping to sell.
What's RPP funds?
It's, part of Carl Perkins, it's,
When they have, every so often they have to update their program. So is it every 5, Andy?
Every 5 years.
Every 5 years. So when they have done that, they get a lump sum of dollars to infuse into the program.
So what you do is you set goals and then they give you money to work toward those goals.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this would be the expansion of ag welding into his ag program.
Gotcha. So 6,500 would be roughly the difference between what the old stuff sells for, depending on what it brings.
I'll move to approve.
I'll second it.
A motion by Dustin, seconded by Chris to approve selling of old welding equipment and purchasing some new equipment to add ag welding to our ag classes. Do we have any discussion, any questions? Anybody wish to speak against that motion?
And this would come out of which funds? Just out of what?
The general fund, but they have RPP funding that would take care of that.
Okay.
We would get reimbursed for it once the expenses went through. Am I right, Joe, in saying that?
Yeah, you've got a district contribution. If his estimates are right, and he's been working with the welding shop to kind of get a feel for what those older welders might bring. He's estimating that there would be a difference of about 6,500 in that equipment.
And since it's equipment, there's no way that could be coupled?
It can.
It can.
It can be, but one of the things that you have to spend that money on, one of the categories is equipment.
Yeah.
There's equipment, there's professional development, there's curriculum.
Yeah.
So some of it, I mean, traditionally, most schools spend as much as they can on equipment. And historically, we agree.
Yep, very much so.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll call for a vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, next we have resignations. Macy Andreessen, middle school volleyball. Any resignation letter or anything to share with that, Joe?
Yeah, that's on this
Yeah, it was in there.
page.
I'm not sure what the page number, but yes.
Oh, it's page before, okay. Did she allow us to read that in this case?
I literally got that this afternoon,
So we don't have that. It's here for the board to read, but I'm not authorized by the individual to share that publicly at this point. Do we have a motion?
I'll move to approve
I'll second.
with appreciation.
Yeah.
We have a motion by Chris, seconded by Dina, to accept the resignation of Macy with appreciation for her time and service in that area. Before I move to the vote, anyone have any concerns, any questions about that? Okay, I'll call for a vote. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Next, we have a contract for Stacy Shellhammer, for middle school, high school counselor. Motion?
Second.
A motion by Sarah, seconded by Sheree to approve Stacy Shellhammer as middle school, high school counselor. Any questions about that? Anyone wish to speak against that motion? All right, I'll call for a vote. All in favor, please say aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Next is superintendent update.
We'll move right along fairly quick. SWOT surveys have been out now for about a week, almost 2. And we're sitting right now with 9 responses, so we'll push out another reminder.
And you gave them a deadline of end of April, right? Okay, next is discuss approved superintendent's year-end performance review. There is an attached, there was a document handed out, I believe it's numbered page 37 and 38, separate individual sheet. Sarah and I met with Joe, went through that review process last Friday, and he's going to keep in our weekly updates and kind of that bottom section there, tracking for us what his goals and objectives are over the remaining 4 months. Any questions about superintendent? Actually, do we have a motion on the superintendent year-end performance review?
To move to approve.
I'll second.
A motion by Chris, seconded by Sarah to approve the superintendent year-end performance review. Do we have anyone who wishes to speak against that motion or has any questions? Call for a vote. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Committee work updates. I already did give a detailed update on the PR committee and the meeting at Pomeroy. Any facility committee updates?
Facilities met, and we just reviewed we have a working kind of template. And then I think Joe's gathering some data and updating the template so that we can kind of have a good updated starting point.
Negotiations committee is meeting with the PAEA tomorrow. They will give us their initial offer and we will give our counter offer tomorrow night. And then hopefully if things go well, we'll start closed session from there and see where things go. Ad hoc retirement committee, you guys have a date scheduled coming up for that work committee? Thursday, I believe, isn't it? Thursday. I believe there's been any other active committees since the last meeting, is that right? Anybody else have anything for committee work updates? Next is the board calendar, board training. Couple things coming up. The March 18th bargaining, March 20th ad hoc committee. We have a tentative, if things don't complete tomorrow, which most likely it would not, that March 25th date, we're looking at the 28th actually for bargaining again. So that would be on Friday the 28th. April 2nd, proposed tax hearing date, April 15th. Last date for licensed staff reduction notices, April 21st, budget hearing. And then.
And April 21st is our next scheduled
It's a regular
meeting.
board meeting, yeah. There's a note there about demolition with that, Joe. Is that just maybe a carryover from last month or something?
That must be, I'm not quite sure what that is. I think it just, probably didn't get deleted from something else.
So just cross it out?
Cross it out.
All right, thank you.
All right, our next regular meeting is April 21st at 7 p.m., which will be here in the middle school science room.
Board training at 6:30.
Training at 6:30. Board takeaways. You want to go first tonight?
I was really impressed with the sixth grader that got up there and gave the presentation.
Oh,
I thought she did an amazing, job
Yeah.
for a young kid.
Yes.
Millie was a very impressive young lady all the way around.
I like that program in general. That's gonna bring a lot of opportunities.
Yeah,
That was mine, Chris.
you're welcome.
I liked the information, ideas about the EDCE and, being able to look for opportunities. I think that's a great program as well. Quite needed.
I'd like to thank Travis and really Karen and Joe for the work they put in behind that. It was a very detailed view of our 5-year budget and helping us understand some of the levers and actions we could take. No, it's just very valuable to the board, and thank you for that.
I agree with the Millie getting up and talking with the sign language and, I'm interested in this Apogee app and how that moves forward too. And I think it'll be a good thing for the district, for sure.
Yeah.
Kind of everything everybody else said, yeah.
Exactly.
I like the idea of everything being on one app. I think that'll just be easier for people to find the information.
Joe or Karen, any takeaways you want to share?
Good.
Okay. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Seconded.
We have a motion by Chris, seconded by Sarah to adjourn the meeting. All in favor, please say aye. Okay, meeting is adjourned. I do have one quick question. Joe, did you want to do the exempt closed session with the board to advise some boundaries for negotiations? Correct. Okay. You,
Very briefly, but.
Very
You want the whole board or just?
Whole board.
Okay.
Yep. Just this meeting now first.
All ayes, is the motion carried for the event?
Yes. Yes. Motion carried.
we're gonna do a brief